He had once been the most outspoken warrior in Parliament, yet when the nation faced crisis, he chose to flee with his family and sail to America. This man was Oliver Cromwell, a devout Puritan and a visionary country gentleman. The England of his dreams was a great country that was prosperous, God-fearing, and had a sound rule of law. But reality had utterly disappointed him.
I am leaving because this country crawls with greed and corruption. It is governed by adventurers and profiteers who think more of their pockets than their principles.
Even more unbearable was the king's tyranny. Everything he had fought for had collapsed, and it seemed as though God himself had abandoned the country. His old friend, John Pym, and the fiery young radical Henry Ireton traveled from London to persuade him to stay. They brought astonishing news. The king, needing funds to wage war against Scotland, planned to reconvene Parliament. To them, this was a golden opportunity to reshape the nation's system of governance. But Cromwell was disheartened. He was weary of the endless power struggle with the king.
A war against whom?
Mr. Ireton, against the king, sir.
The king? You mean a civil war in England?
Cromwell was stunned by Ireton's words, left speechless in disbelief. He angrily rebutted what he saw as treasonous remarks. He firmly believed that even if the king was deeply flawed, rebellion against the crown was absolutely impermissible. However, the iron fist of fate soon struck him, making him realize just how powerless escape truly was. The king's loyal enforcer, the Earl of Manchester, began openly seizing common lands belonging to the people. One of Cromwell's farmhands was arrested on the spot for calling the king a thief. Cromwell stepped forward, confronting the authorities in his capacity as a justice of the peace. However, the response he received left Cromwell disheartened and despondent.
As a magistrate, you should know the king is the law of this land.
Before royal power, the law had become nothing but an empty piece of paper. If the land seizures were an attack on civil rights, what happened next ignited the fire of Cromwell's faith. He entered his church to find it lavishly decorated on the king's orders, with ornate, Catholic-style embellishments. To a Puritan like Cromwell, this was nothing short of sacrilege. His long-suppressed fury erupted at last.
Mr. Cromwell, away with it! Popish! Idolaters!
At that very moment, a bloodied man burst into the church. He was a villager who had resisted the land seizures and had been brutally suppressed. Faced with this scene of human suffering, Cromwell finally let out a curse from the depths of his soul.
God damn this king.
Meanwhile, in King Charles's court, the atmosphere was strikingly different. The king is furious because the prince is praying with the Catholic queen, stressing that he alone is the leader of the Protestant nation. This hypocritical scene stands in stark contrast to his efforts to impose Catholicism on the people. With Scottish rebels marching to the gates, the king desperately needed money. So, he recalled the formidable Earl of Strafford. But with the treasury empty, there was no talk of an army. In desperation, the king had no choice but to resort to the method he least wanted. He summoned Parliament and decided to raise funds by taxing the common people. Strafford arrogantly advised the king to simply use his royal power to impose forced levies, even at the cost of waging war against his own people.
Aye! Before they declare war on you.
At that moment, Cromwell's plan to flee was shattered. He returned to London, accompanied by his sons. This time, he would no longer be a bystander, but the very center of the storm. Parliament convened, instantly charged with tension. Members refused to grant the king funds unless long-standing grievances were first addressed. They presented a revolutionary demand. The monarchy must relinquish all authority over Parliament. This enraged the king and his loyalists. Incited by the Queen and driven by Strafford, the king resolved to strike decisively. But John Pym acted first, exposing the king's plot on the floor of Parliament. He skillfully directed all accusations straight at Strafford. At this critical moment, Cromwell declared that the king had merely been misled, that these actions were not his own will. Instead, he proposed arresting Strafford on charges of treason. And so, the king was forced to sign the death warrant of his most loyal servant, leaving him filled with regret and despair. He angrily shouted at the Queen, claiming that everything had been done according to her suggestion. Having lost his most devoted advisor, the king had no choice but to negotiate once more with parliamentary representatives, among them Cromwell. It was the first time Cromwell confronted the king directly, introducing a radical and shocking concept for the time: democracy. Calm and resolute, Cromwell stated they wished to be consulted, not commanded. He boldly accused the king of manipulating domestic politics by tolerating Catholics in Ireland. The king exploded in rage at this audacious challenge. Negotiations collapsed again. Though outwardly agreeing to consider Parliament's proposals, the king secretly, once again spurred on by the Queen, decided to break completely. He would personally arrest the 5 leading opponents. News reached the members of Parliament quickly, and one of them revealed the plot to the Assembly. Yet while the others fled, Cromwell chose to stay behind. Soon, the king arrived with 100 armed soldiers to arrest Cromwell, but the Parliament members locked the doors, blocking the soldiers from entering the chamber. The soldiers successfully broke in, and the scene descended into complete chaos. Cromwell remained seated calmly, silently watching the scene unfold. This was an unprecedented act of violence in British history. The king took the speaker's chair, named the 5 men, and declared they would be arrested for treason. Then the king noticed the empty seats, but Cromwell had not left.
Mr. Speaker, where are these gentlemen?
May it please your majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak, except as this house gives me leave.
Enraged, he ordered Cromwell's immediate arrest. Cromwell did not flinch. He declared that anyone who laid a hand on a member of Parliament would be considered an enemy of the state. Any action against Parliament, he proclaimed, was a crime against the people. Seeing this defiance, the king announced that Parliament's role was no longer needed by the state and that he would use his royal authority to dissolve it. With this act, he pushed the nation irreversibly to the brink of civil war. The king left the chamber, but the members of Parliament remained.
Now do we see in what contempt this king holds this house and this nation.
It be either your king or your Parliament.
Cromwell's voice was firm. The people had already made their choice. Parliament announced that it would take control of the militia, and the country would enter a defensive posture. England had officially entered civil war. The war drum sounded. Cromwell transformed from parliamentarian to colonel. Among his ranks were fearless old farmers, one of whom even brought his own coffin to the battlefield. They marched to battle for faith and freedom, singing hymns as they went. On the other side, the king's army appeared invincible. His bold and fierce nephew, Prince Rupert, arrogantly declared he would sever the heads of all rebels within a week. On the battlefield, both sides lined up. Once countrymen, they now stood as enemies on the battlefield. Before the fighting began, the opposing commanders even arranged the time of engagement like gentlemen. Prince Rupert sneered that soon this land would be drenched in English blood.
If this be so, they will have been killed by Englishmen, for we have not seen fit to import foreign mercenaries into our ranks.
The battle commenced. The parliamentarian artillery fired prematurely in haste, exposing their lack of discipline. Prince Rupert's elite cavalry charged like a sharp blade, effortlessly breaking through the flanks of the parliamentary forces. The parliamentary commander panicked and actually ordered a full retreat. Seeing the lines crumble, Cromwell was furious, yet powerless to turn the tide. The first major battle ended in a crushing defeat for the parliamentary army. After the battle, Cromwell bitterly analyzed the reasons for their failure in his tent. He realized this war could not be won with an undisciplined rabble. Defying orders from his superiors, he made the bold decision to return to Cambridge and personally forge an unprecedented elite force. This army would later become world famous as the Ironsides. Meanwhile, the Royalists, elated by their victory, received intelligence that Cromwell's forces had appeared near Naseby, seemingly isolated and overextended. To them, Cromwell daring to challenge their 7,000 troops with only 3,000 men was nothing short of suicide. The king rejoiced, believing he had finally cornered his most dangerous enemy. What he did not know was that he was walking straight into a carefully laid trap, and waiting for him was Cromwell and his Ironsides, with blades already sharpened. At the 1645 Battle of Naseby, the Allied commander, the Earl of Manchester, who was supposed to join them, failed to arrive. Cromwell's heart was filled with a burning anger from the sense of betrayal. Not only did they receive no reinforcements, but they suddenly faced the king's main army, Yet he did not retreat. Instead, he chose to confront the royal forces head-on. In his pre-battle speech, Cromwell frankly told his soldiers the enemy outnumbered them 3-1, and their reinforcements remained nowhere to be found. He turned the Earl of Manchester's absence into fuel for morale. His men were anxious about the overwhelming odds. But Cromwell cited biblical stories, emphasizing that victory did not depend on numbers, but on speed and surprise. He promised them victory, urging them to place their faith in God, while reminding them not to forget the gunpowder in their muskets. The battle cry sounded. Cromwell's new model army surged forward like a steel tide. When the royalist commanders saw this, they mocked Cromwell. Cavalry clashed with swords in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Cromwell led from the front, constantly reorganizing his troops and pursuing the fleeing enemy. The battlefield was strewn with corpses. Seeing the tide had turned, a royalist general urged the king to retreat, but the king haughtily refused. The Battle of Naseby ended in a complete victory for the parliamentary forces. This triumph decisively turned the tide of the English Civil War. Afterward, Cromwell returned to the House of Parliament. He could no longer tolerate the incompetence and inefficiency of the High Command. In fury, he denounced aristocratic generals like the Earl of Manchester, accusing them of wavering in war and betraying both the nation and the revolutionary cause. He challenged Parliament with the blood of fallen soldiers. If they would not see the war through to the end, then he would lay down his arms and let Parliament make peace with the king. Ultimately, he moved a resolution demanding the collective resignation of the supreme commanders. After heated debate, the motion passed. Cromwell was appointed commander-in-chief of all forces. The currents of history had thrust him to the very center of power. Meanwhile, King Charles's camp was shrouded in gloom. All the news he received was bad, and everywhere, it was Cromwell's name that echoed. His advisors bluntly told him the war was already lost, that his strategies were mere theoretical exercises. Yet the king still clung to illusions, hoping to reverse his fate by allying with the Scots, the French, or even Catholic forces in Ireland. The idea of allying with Catholics sparked fierce opposition among the king's nobles. They would rather seek a dignified peace than wage a dishonorable war. But the king was nearing madness. He declared he would rather ally with the devil himself than surrender to Parliament. An emissary from the Pope arrived to negotiate, presenting extremely harsh terms: the complete restoration of Catholicism in Ireland and the closure of all Protestant churches. This was undoubtedly a betrayal of King Charles's coronation oath as the leader of the Church of England. The Queen reminded him that without the crown, he would be nothing. As Charles hesitated, even worse news arrived. Bristol, the city he had pinned his hopes on, had fallen. Charles unleashed all his fury upon Prince Rupert. Rupert explained that his army was exhausted, ravaged by disease, and that the 2,000 survivors he brought back were the last hope preserved for the king. But Charles refused to listen. He accused Rupert of dereliction of duty, trading the entire city's supplies for his own escape. This decision, he claimed, might cost them the entire war. In the end, the king issued a cold and cruel order. Rupert was to be exiled. Rupert knelt in plea, stating that he would rather die in battle with honor than endure the humiliation of exile. But the king's heart had turned to stone, unmoved.
His Highness is to be kept under close guard until such time as he is deported.
With all hope lost, the king arranged for the queen and his eldest son to flee to France, preserving the last line of royal blood and hope. He tenderly urged his son to one day rule the country with greater happiness than he had. It was a farewell between father and son, and perhaps the final parting between a king and his heir. Soon after, Cromwell's army arrived at the gates. The king was captured. Faced with an arrest warrant issued by order of Parliament, the king still insisted that in England, no authority could stand above the king. Ironically, this very belief was the root cause of the war. At the same time, political turmoil struck. John Pym, the hardline leader in Parliament, died. Parliamentary members began shifting toward negotiating peace with the king and even ordered the army disbanded. Cromwell firmly maintained that the army must never stand above Parliament. Yet, behind the scenes, the Earl of Manchester was secretly negotiating with the king. They sought to secure peace by disbanding the army. To win Cromwell over, they even offered him a generous pension and land grants. Cromwell immediately exposed this sordid political deal. He declared that Parliament's army would not disband until the king had genuinely compromised. If the king refused to negotiate with Parliament, then let him negotiate with the army. To seize absolute control of the negotiations, Cromwell made a stunning decision. He led his troops into Parliament. The Earl of Manchester cried out that this was dictatorship and would ignite a new civil war. But Cromwell insisted he had been forced into this with no other choice. In the name of the sacred, he pledged that the army would only disband once the freedom of the nation and its people was secured. Thus, Cromwell brought the army's proposal directly to the imprisoned king. He made it clear he represented the army, the heart and conscience of the people. Cromwell admitted that an England without a king was unimaginable, but what he wanted was a monarch who ruled with the people's loyalty, not through fear. Only such a king could reunite the nation and make the name of England resound throughout the world. The king outwardly expressed admiration and respect for Cromwell's noble ambitions. He dismissed them, saying he needed time to study the matter. Yet the moment Cromwell left, the king revealed his true face. In the army camp, soldiers heard that Cromwell had negotiated with the king and erupted in outrage. They believed Cromwell had betrayed the revolution, seeking to restore the king to the throne. Cromwell rushed to the mutinous camp, still convinced his actions could teach the king the meaning of integrity. To suppress the mutiny, he was even prepared to enforce military law and execute the ringleaders. At the moment when he was guaranteeing the king's life, the king's confidant Sir Edward Hyde brought him shocking news. Hyde exposed the king's colossal conspiracy. The king had never even read their proposed terms. Hyde revealed that the king had secretly allied with the Earl of Manchester, planning to invite Scottish and Irish forces into England to launch a second civil war. Hyde, too, had finally seen the king's true nature, admitting he had served for years a man unworthy of the crown. Cromwell's faith shattered completely. He ordered the immediate release of the soldiers who were about to be executed. The king's betrayal ignited a furious fire in his heart. He returned to Parliament and declared to all present that King Charles must be tried for treason, a cruel, heartless tyrant. An unprecedented trial began. King Charles was brought before the court, charged with instigating civil war. He was accused of treason, massacre, plunder, and a long list of crimes, denounced as a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and enemy of the people. In response to the charges, the king refused to answer. He claimed his authority came from divine right, from an ancient and legitimate bloodline. He would only acknowledge that he stood before a display of power, not a lawful court. The court summoned the king's former confidant, Sir Edward Hyde. Hyde was forced to admit that he had personally witnessed the king's secret conspiracy with the Earl of Manchester, plotting to bring Irish forces into England to fight Parliament. Moreover, the king had been secretly contacting foreign powers like France and the Netherlands, intending to invite external enemies to prolong the war. With evidence overwhelming, the king's treason was laid bare for all to see. As the trial neared its end, the king still refused to recognize the court's authority, insisting he would only respond before a full parliament. Cromwell and others saw this as nothing more than a delaying tactic. Yet, during the final verdict, deep divisions emerged within the tribunal. Some believed the king answered only to God. Others feared that if the charges failed, the king's vengeance would be catastrophic. Cromwell reminded them, the king is not England, and England is not the king. It was not the king who now faced life or death, it was England itself. The king's lies and acts of treason had proven he was unfit to rule this nation. Cromwell made one final compromise. He declared that if the king would agree to let an elected parliament govern the country, the trial would end immediately, but the king rejected this last chance. Cromwell then produced the death warrant he had long prepared, yet even his closest comrade Fairfax refused to sign it. The court ultimately delivered its verdict. King Charles, convicted of treason, would be executed by beheading. The king's final request to speak was coldly denied. He was led away amid the roaring fury of the crowd. On the eve of execution, someone arrived with £40,000 in ransom, attempting to buy the king's life. Cromwell remained unmoved. He saw it as an insult to his principles. Meanwhile, the king calmly bid farewell to his children. He instructed his son, Prince Henry, that under no circumstances should he be proclaimed king as long as Charles still lived. He told his children that he was going to a glorious death.
I would be torn to pieces first.
This is my son.
Then he asked his daughter to tell the queen that his love for her would last beyond death. On the cold morning of execution, the king said he had worn an extra shirt so that his shivering from the cold would not be mistaken for fear. On the scaffold, facing the masked executioner, he mockingly asked whether they dared not kill their king openly. After his prayer, he calmly extended his hand, giving the signal to proceed. And so, the life of a king came to an end. The executioner raised the severed head and proclaimed to the world, "Behold, the head of a traitor." Cromwell declared, "The monarchy is abolished. Long live the republic." The war was over. All he wanted was to return home, to seek a moment of peace for his soul. Yet, though he had severed the chains of power, he had also opened Pandora's box. Parliamentary representatives came to him, saying the nation needed a king, but they told him it was impractical to let the people control Parliament. Hearing this, Cromwell was first stunned, then burst into laughter. He mocked himself, asking his wife, "What does a weary, rough countryman like me have of a king's bearing?" But his wife told Cromwell, "You are the only one who can govern this nation." Those words struck deep within him. He raged that the crown meant nothing to him. Then he warned his son-in-law, Ireton, that if he sought to use him for power, Cromwell would destroy him with his own hands. Yet reality shattered his ideals once again. He had abolished the king, but the parliament he established quickly became corrupt. Members enriched themselves through their offices, openly declaring that if they gained no personal profit, being a member of parliament was meaningless. Even more absurdly, they tried to pass a law allowing themselves to stay in power for another 3 years, without the need for re-election. In 6 years, the parliament he had built brought only anarchy, corruption, division, and discontent. An unshakable parliament, it turned out, was even more loathsome than an unshakable king. He ordered the army in and forcibly expelled all members of parliament. He threw away the scepter, the symbol of parliamentary power. Cromwell said bitterly, "They once cut off a king's head for doing the very same thing." It was the betrayal of these very men that had forced him to this point. Night and day, he prayed for God's guidance, and finally understood this nation must be governed justly. Cromwell swore he would restore the nation's dignity, liberate minds, build schools, make the law accessible, and ensure no one went hungry. He would make this God-fearing nation prosperous and strong. In the name of the living God, Cromwell vowed to ensure all this would come to pass, even if he had to do it alone. And so, under the title of Lord Protector, Cromwell began 5 years of rule. Under his leadership, England became a powerful nation feared and respected around the world, and laid the foundations for the modern democratic state. Yet, only 3 years after his death, the monarchy was restored. Charles's son ascended the throne. Kings once again sat upon the crown, but this nation would never again be the England of old.